Welcome to Connections and Conversations, an Advocacy Arena podcast, working to increase civic engagement and strengthen our communities. So, hello, everyone. I am so glad to be here with you today. It's just me in the studio, and I thought I'd talk to some of our listeners and folks in the Advocacy Arena community. And I did this interesting thing knowing that I was really just going to try to speak more to issues and things that I was concerned about. And I reached out to a few of our supporters and asked them what kind of questions, if they were interviewing me, they might ask. And shockingly, I got back some wonderful questions. So it kind of made me change the direction that I was going in today. So I'm just going to get started with some of these great questions that I got from folks. And I really want to thank you for, responding. And one of the first questions that I got was, what was my lived experience that drove me to do what I'm actively doing today? And I would say, just briefly, growing up in the rural South under Jim Crow, being basically the Ruby Bridges experiment in my hometown, meaning I was one of the first Black kids to integrate the school in my hometown. Of course, it left a lasting impact. It wasn't a horrible experience, but as I grew into adulthood, I realized that it did shape me in a different way than maybe others, school experience. So that has always played a major role. And the fact that I've always been a bit of a history nerd and was very aware of some of the history that was occurring here in my state and in the South that allowed that to happen for me. That's probably what drives me. I have another question. What was my experience as a woman in the military like? Some of the biggest benefits and some of the largest hardships, because I am a veteran, by the way. And I would say it was wonderful. It's probably one of the most proudest moments of my life, one of the most memorable moments of my life, that period. I met a lot of great people, friends that I still have today. I got to travel to other countries. So that is to impart what has shaped me. I spent a decade in Germany. I was in a combat support hospital as a support staff. So that takes me to the next question. They wanted to know what my experience as a Black woman in Germany outside the base and in was. Well, interestingly enough, I made a lot of friends because I've always been curious, as I said, and a bit of a history nerd. So yeah, I'm in this country that had this phenomenal history, not good, and I wanted to learn and know more about it. I was intentional about going into what we called it there when you went off base. It was called going onto the economy, the German economy. So I made sure that I immersed myself in it as often as possible, because it is quite possible to be a military person, be stationed overseas, especially in a place like Germany, which has a lot of bases, a lot of military people there, to live and do everything that you want to do without ever going off base or really encountering the German economy. And what I found was that, again, as a Black person, I was aware and subjected to discrimination and segregation and all kinds of things here in the South as a Black kid. But there, it seemed to be almost a novelty that they appreciated. They wanted to understand things about me, about my life, and I felt really accepted. And I found that they looked down on my Americanism more than my Blackness. And I understood at that moment why there was a period in time when a lot of Black artists and various people left the United States and went to places like France and felt more welcome and accepted. And I felt that same kind of spirit there. So on to the next question. Who are my biggest inspirations? Well, I don't think it's a secret with a lot of people because of the way I run the weekly live chat, Good Trouble chat that we have. And it's called Good Trouble because one of my heroes is John Lewis. I think it is because, again, he got his activism start, if you will, here in Nashville as a student. So I was always aware of that history. I have relatives who are alumni of the school, Fisk University, where he got involved with SNCC. And of course, the sit ins and things that were going on here were very much a part of my childhood. And to later in adulthood see him as a congressman meant a lot to me. And it to me just was a living example of someone who walked the talk. I mean, they did things and he continued to do things throughout his life. Like late in his later years in Congress, he had a sit in because of the former administration, the Trump administration, things that they were doing. I think this was around maybe the Black Lives Matter movement and the things that were going on then. And it just was like that youthful spirit of activism never left him. And he channeled it by becoming a public servant. And so I would say he's one of my biggest inspirations. I have others, but I'll just leave that one there for now. And they also ask, in my family or close friends or colleagues influenced me to be involved in political events. And I guess you could say I just was always aware. I wasn't actually part of a family that was like politically involved per se. They were, of course, quietly political and active, pushing back against things. But I would say I really got actively involved in politics in my later life after my military experience when I had moved back to my hometown and I was working for a staffing agency. And part of my job was to get out and mix and mingle in the community to build relationships and network. And we had a mayoral race going on, and I attended a luncheon with a lot of other leaders and members of the community. And I heard each of the candidates kind of give their stump speech. I was really impressed with one of them. So I wanted to find out like if it was just a speech or how intent he was on keeping the promises and things that he made. So I made an intentional stop in his headquarters the next day and found him there and pretty much told him that like I liked what you had to say. Now I would like to know how you plan on carrying that out. Like, are you serious? Like, because I'm really thinking of voting for you, but I want to know that you're going to walk the talk, basically. And we had a great chat. I liked his answers. And then he did something that said something very surprising to me. He said, if I win, I would like for you to be my assistant. I said, sure, okay. And I went on about my business. I thought, yeah, he's just saying he's blowing smoke, you know. Lo and behold, he won. And he called me. And I left my staffing agency job and I went to work for him. So there at the local level in the city, I became very involved because then it was part of my job. He was a wonderful man. He was a Republican. And, you know, at the time, I was a Democrat. I still am. You know, kind of independent because we don't have to declare here. But Democrats are always, you know, who I voted for in presidential elections. Locally, it's a little different. But anyway, through that work and him, I became very involved in a lot of local organizations. I met a lot of local politicians. I met some of the ones who now represent us in Congress or in the Senate now when they were just kind of starting out in their political walk. And Marsha Blackburn is one of them. Diane Black was another. And so I got to see and interact with them at a local level. And I liked it. I was bitten, I guess you could say, by the political bug. So I just continued to stay involved and aware. And of course, he was always trying to convert me, but I stuck to my beliefs, and I always believed that the things that I wanted could be found in the Democratic Party. But one of the things that I did enjoy about working for him was the fact that, we had different ideologies, I guess you could say, but we always had really rich, vibrant debates about them. And we could approach it in a way that was civil. Even when we disagreed, there was always this respect and understanding. We didn't always change each other's mind, but it gave us a deeper understanding of why we thought the way we thought about things. And this was someone who wanted good things for our community, which is why I voted for him. Yeah, I think the difference is, like now today, it's the approach that we choose to take, the political parties choose to take to get there. So that's kind of how I got really, really involved with politics. And I just have never stopped because, again, being a military person, I think that's part of the reason why I kind of always kind of stayed in that neutral zone, because as a veteran, I took an oath to the Constitution, not a party, not a president or whatever. And that was kind of my political approach in general. But working for him was during the Clinton administration. So I could see all this talk and things stirring up, the divide starting to get deeper, and just kept an eye on things. And I guess you could say it's a ball that continues to roll. And so the next question I have is like, why did I start Advocacy Arena? Well, I don't want to say it started as a fluke because I actually wrote a mission statement for it, but how it came to be, how I came to make that vision come to pass, if you will, was a little bit of a fluke. During the pandemic, Twitter, which is now X, rolled out a new feature, Spaces. And it's this great place where you can have these wonderful audio conversations. And I was asked to be a beta tester. And I really, really enjoyed it because I had been on Twitter for a very long time, but I wasn't that active on it. And the Spaces conversations gave me a new appreciation for it, especially at a time when I felt like the world was just on fire. It was crazy. We were experiencing something, a global pandemic. People were scared. We also had a president who was not exactly, I think, doing good things for our country and in typical ways. He wasn't governing in typical presidential ways in which, whether or not you agreed or disagreed with the policy was just kind of unprecedented, a word which we have all come to uh, get to know with him being in office. So we started having these conversations first around the pandemic and just finding a sense of togetherness, consoling one another, but also recognizing how the pandemic was being managed by the administration. So, of course, the talks became more political. And a year prior to that, I had retired early because of the pandemic and some other issues. And I had thought about doing a podcast, and I wanted to. I'm a little nerdy and OCD around some things, so I kind of wrote out what I wanted it to be about and how I wanted to do it. And at the time, my thought was this thing around the media that still kind of irks me is, we always get these sensational stories. And I understand with the news, if it leads, it leads, I guess, is the thing. And I don't like it. I don't like the crime blotter, but I like to stay informed. And so I was always drawn to news formats that shared good stories, happy stories, stories of people doing great things. And that's kind of what I wanted my podcast to be around. I wanted to find people who were advocating, doing great things in their community and highlight and amplify those stories to kind of supplement what the news, wasn't doing. But these conversations that I started having really kind of took on a life of their own. I guess you could say, especially since the we had the bomb on Christmas here in downtown Nashville. And it was like, again, for a day on Christmas Day, the world stood still. I was cut off from a lot of people. And the very next day, went on to these Twitter spaces, and the connection I felt with total strangers, just being able to talk about these things and share, was so strong. And the person that I was doing it with, we were both kind of looking for something to do. And we just started having these conversations at noon. And the conversations lasted sometimes 8 hours, sometimes 6 hours. And we were doing it every day, Monday through Friday. And I liked it. And more people kept coming and joining. That's kind of how it evolved organically. And I really, once I could see how much people enjoyed it, I felt that there was a need to bring more focus to it and purpose to it. So I really started tightening up the manner, the style in which I did it, providing an agenda, setting some ground rules, kind of based in like, because a lot of times if you're not aware of these spaces, a lot of time it's a lot of drama, a lot of confrontation. And so I went back to my experience with, my old boss. And I wanted to make sure that people could have conversations and agree to disagree, but do it respectfully. So, I just, as I said, just kept kind of organically developing a format that worked and grew people. And of course, we were in an election. People were running for office, and some of them were on Twitter. And I reached out to a few of them and said, "Hey, you want to come in here and talk about your race?" And so then I started using it as a platform for candidates that were running, basically to come in and do a town hall to vet them, because people started gaining a sense of respect for me and what I thought. And I thought, here's a good opportunity for people to get to know these candidates, to ask them questions, and to feel whether or not they were authentic, because I felt like you could really sense that in those conversations. And so it just kind of continued to grow, but doing it Monday through Friday got to be a bit much, and I wanted to continue to do it. So I thought about how I could do that in a way that I could wrap my arms around and be committed to and consistent with. So I decided to do it just one day a week and really focus it. And so for the past 3 years now, 2.5 years, we've been doing it one day a week. And one of the other questions I have is what makes me passionate about democracy? Because when the spaces conversation first started, it was called pro democracy. It evolved and changed a little bit. It was primarily because I was very concerned about the state of our democracy. Being a veteran, it was very important to me, and being a Black woman, that also made it very important to me to fight for it in whatever way I can to help people to understand the importance of it. So I'm just passionate about that because our country is a democracy. It's a democratic republic, which means it's based on the Constitution, and we get to have input. And that is kind of the focus of Advocacy Arena, is increasing civic engagement, because that was the other thing that I was seeing in some of the races and things that we were having, is that people were just not politically engaged, or they didn't like politics. They didn't want to talk about politics. And I just wanted people to understand and know that politics affects everything in our lives. And I wanted to continue talking about it and really talking to people, not people who disagreed with me politically, but people who maybe were not engaged and didn't feel comfortable talking about politics, to help them and to bring them into political awareness and help them understand the importance of exercising their civic duties and how people fought and sacrificed for them to be able to enjoy them, people like John Lewis. That's kind of how Advocacy Arena came about and why it's formatted in the way that it is. Another question that I got is, what issues are most important to me? And I would say having people to be civically engaged and doing the work that will preserve our democracy, whatever that looks like for each individual. I do think that that is how we preserve our democracy, which is really quite young. We're going on 250 years here now, but it's had a lot of changes up until recently going in the right direction. I guess I would say that it is just important for me for people to be civically engaged. And another question that I got was the numerous challenges facing the United States right now. What do I think is probably the most critical one? And I would say, like, us continuing to be a country of rule of law, because I see that, kind of dwindling and changing. So that's very important to me. And we have some other questions, but I want to start to kind of wind down a little bit. But I think that this is going to be a nice little segment for us to do on a regular basis, if you will. Just write in or come to Advocacy Arena and ask Miss D some questions that are weighing on your mind. I'm not an expert or anything, but I am someone who is very passionate about civic engagement and try to keep a keen eye on, our political situation. And with that, I want to start to kind of wrap up a little bit with some of the questions that people had around this terrible time in the history, and like when it comes to an end, what do I think? What kind of changes would I like to see occurring from it? And I often tell people that, yes, we're going through a tough time. We've been through tough times before in this country, like slavery. After that, not getting a lot to actually practice a lot of the rights and things that we had because of the Reconstruction Acts passed after the Civil War, and needing the civil rights movement. Again, we've been in terrible places before, but we have always been able to work to improve them. So I believe that this too is one of those places and inflection points where we're going to have to do a lot of work to improve them. Again, that falls on us as citizens, because I think that a lot of people have become complacent and have an attitude that our democracy runs on autopilot, that they can just, sit back and, maybe get involved every 4 years or whatever. But I want people to start thinking differently and to stay engaged, whether they're like hyper focused on politics and elections and things or not, but getting them involved on a local level, I think is very important. And I think that is one of the differences in the Advocacy Arena podcast and community, is that a lot of people have spaces, audio conversations around politics, but I always like to have these conversations, have them focused, and also to provide solutions. And I like to think that we are the cavalry, we are the solutions, and that all the brokenness, all the pieces that it's being broken into, there's this Japanese art, the name escapes me, but where they take broken pottery and they put it back together. And it is something new, useful, and beautiful. And that's what I like to think will happen to our democracy, that we will preserve it and we will strengthen it, and it will be even more beautiful. So I do believe that there is hope for us. And I do see Advocacy Arena as part of the work and effort to getting us there. And so that's kind of my hope for Advocacy Arena. People have asked me who in politics I would love to have as a guest in Advocacy Arena. And I guess I said, if I'm reaching for the stars here, I would love to have someone like a Cory Booker or Jasmine Crockett sometime in the future. But there are a whole lot of others as well. And I just want to thank you all for continuing to listen to Advocacy Arena. I hope that you will join us on our weekly chats that we have on Spoutable. It's spoutable.com. They are every Monday. We start at 12 noon Central Time and usually go 3 hours to 3.5, sometimes 4. The conversation is good and important. So we're going to keep doing this. I want you guys to keep asking me questions. I kind of like this and look forward to doing it again really soon.